32 years of marriage, I thought I knew everything about my husband. His favorite coffee blend, the way he hummed off-key in the shower, how he always slept on the left side of the bed. I thought I knew the rhythm of our life together, predictable as the Ohio seasons. Until that Tuesday evening when the nurse at Cleveland General looked up from her clipboard and said, "Don't worry, we've already notified his other emergency contact." She paused, checking her notes. "A Sophia Lewis, she's on her way." Lewis, my last name, on a woman I'd never heard of. My name is Margaret Lewis, and at 68 years old, I thought surprises were behind me. That Tuesday started like any other in our small Ohio town. I was standing at the kitchen counter, peeling potatoes for Charles's favorite shepherd's pie, when the phone rang at 6:17 p. Patient. The caller ID showed Cleveland General Hospital. "Mrs. Lewis, this is Dr. Patterson from the cardiac unit. Your husband has been brought in with chest pains. He's stable now, but you should come as soon as possible." The peeler clattered into the sink. My hands shook as I grabbed my purse, not bothering to turn off the stove. The 20-minute drive to the hospital felt like hours. Rain pelted the windshield as I gripped the steering wheel, my mind racing through possibilities. Charles was only 71. He'd just had his annual checkup. The doctor said his cholesterol was a bit high, nothing serious. The fluorescent lights of the emergency room entrance cut through the evening gloom. I rushed to the reception desk, my voice barely steady. "Charles Lewis. My husband, he was brought in with chest pains." "Third floor, cardiac unit," the receptionist said, her fingers clicking across the keyboard. "Room 304. The elevator ride was agony. A young couple stood beside me, the woman clutching a teddy bear, probably visiting their newborn. I remembered when Charles and I were that young, that hopeful. We'd met at a church social in 1972. He was the ambitious architecture student from Cleveland. I was the elementary school teacher who loved poetry and garden roses. "Doctor Patterson met me outside Charles's room. He was younger than I expected, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Mrs. Lewis, your husband experienced what we call a mild myocardial infarction. He's responded well to treatment, and his vitals are stable." Through the doorway, I could see Charles propped up in bed, oxygen tubes in his nose, monitors beeping steadily. He looked smaller somehow, vulnerable in that hospital gown. For a moment, my anger about the canceled dinners and late nights at the office evaporated. This was my husband, the man who'd held my hand through my mother's funeral, who danced with me at our daughter Emily's wedding. "Can I see him?" "Of course. He's been asking for you." I entered the room, and Charles's eyes fluttered open. "Maggie," he whispered, using the nickname he hadn't called me in years. "I'm sorry you had to—" "Shh," I said, taking his hand. It felt cold, papery. "Don't talk, just rest." A nurse entered, carrying a tablet. She was young, maybe 30, with her hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. "I'm just updating your husband's records, Mrs. Lewis, making sure all the contact information is current." She scrolled through the screen, murmuring to herself. "Primary emergency contact, Margaret Lewis, wife, good and secondary contact." She paused, squinting at the screen. "Sophia Lewis. She's already been notified and should be arriving shortly." The room tilted. I gripped the bed rail to steady myself. "I'm sorry. Who?" The nurse looked up, seemingly oblivious to the earthquake she'd just triggered in my world. "Sophia Lewis. She's listed as his secondary emergency contact." She glanced between Charles and me, perhaps sensing the sudden tension. "Is there a problem with the information?" Charles's heart monitor picked up pace. His eyes, which had been drowsy with medication, suddenly sharpened with what looked like fear. "No," I heard myself say, though my voice sounded like it was coming from very far away. "No problem at all." The nurse nodded and left. I stood there, still holding my husband's hand, feeling the weight of 32 years of certainty crumbling around me. Sophia Lewis, a woman with my last name, a woman important enough to be called if my husband was dying. "Maggie, I can explain," Charles began, but I pulled my hand away. "Rest," I said, my voice steady as steel. We'll talk when you're feeling better." I walked to the window, staring out at the parking lot lights blurring in the rain. Behind me, Charles's breathing grew heavy, whether from exhaustion or anxiety. I couldn't tell. I didn't care. My mind was already racing, piecing together a puzzle I hadn't even known existed. Sophia Lewis. The name echoed in my head like a bell tolling the end of everything I thought I knew. Standing in that hospital room, watching Charles drift into medicated sleep, I couldn't help but think about all the mornings that had come before this one. 32 years of mornings, to be exact. Charles liked his coffee black with 1 sugar, his eggs over easy, his toast barely golden. I knew these things the way I knew my own heartbeat. Our life in Shaker Heights had been predictable in the best way. Charles would leave for his architecture firm in Cleveland at 7:30 sharp, briefcase in hand, pecking me on the cheek at the door. "Have a good day, Maggie," he'd say. Same words, same tone, for decades. I'd given up my teaching career when Emily was born, choosing the role of homemaker with the same dedication I'd once brought to lesson plans and parent conferences. We had our routines. Tuesday was grocery day. Thursday was book club with the ladies from church. Saturday mornings, Charles would putter in his home office while I tended my garden. Sunday was for church and family dinner. It was a life built on small, reliable pleasures. But something had shifted in recent years. When did it start? Maybe 3 years ago, when Charles's firm landed that big commercial project downtown. Suddenly, there were late nights at the office. Big deadline, Maggie, don't wait up. Weekend work sessions became common. You know how it is with these corporate clients. I'd adapted, the way wives do. Started eating dinner alone more often, watching Jeopardy with a tray in the living room instead of at our dining table. The empty chair across from me became familiar, then normal. There were client dinners he couldn't bring spouses to, boring business talk, you'd hate it, conference calls that ran through dinner. I'll grab something at the office. His phone, once carelessly left on counters and nightstands, now lived in his pocket, password protected. "You're being paranoid," I'd told myself, looking in the bathroom mirror as I applied cold cream to the lines around my eyes. This is what happens when men reach their 70s. One last push to prove they're still relevant. But there were moments that nagged at me, like last month, when I'd surprised him at the office with lunch, only to find his secretary looking uncomfortable, telling me he was in an off-site meeting when his car was clearly in the parking garage, or the receipt I'd found in his jacket pocket for a restaurant I'd never been to, dated on a night he'd supposedly been working late. The Christmas party. God, how could I have been so blind? Every year, Thompson and Associates threw a lavish holiday party at the Renaissance Hotel. I'd worn my navy dress, the one with the pearl buttons that Charles had once said made me look elegant. We'd barely arrived when Charles excused himself to greet some clients. I was getting punched when I saw them. Charles stood by the windows overlooking the city lights, deep in conversation with a woman. She was younger, maybe 50, with chestnut hair styled in a way that looked effortlessly expensive. Her laugh was like crystal chiming, and when she touched Charles's arm, he didn't pull away. He leaned in. "That's the new project manager. Linda Thompson, the senior partner's wife, had whispered to me. Sophia something, very talented. I hear Charles has been mentoring her." Mentoring, is that what they called it? I'd watched them for another moment before Charles caught my eye. He'd smiled, waved, but didn't come over, didn't introduce us. The woman, Sophia, had glanced my way with an expression I couldn't read. Pity, amusement, dismissal. The ride home that night was quiet. "Nice party," I'd ventured. "Mm-hmm," Charles had replied, eyes on the road. "Who was that woman you were talking to?" "Which woman?" As if he'd spoken to dozens. "Oh, you mean Sophia? She's working on the riverfront project with me." That was all. No last name, no further explanation. And I, trained by decades of being the understanding wife, hadn't pushed. There were other signs I'd ignored. The new cologne that appeared on his dresser. The gym membership he'd suddenly decided he needed for his health, though he'd never shown interest in exercise before. The way he'd started closing the bathroom door when he showered, after years of casual intimacy. Our physical relationship had cooled, too. We still shared a bed, but it had become a vast continent with each of us clinging to opposite shores. "I'm just tired," he'd say. "It's the stress from work." And I'd believed him. Because what was the alternative? That my husband of 3 decades was pulling away from me? That our life together had become a performance, and I was the only one who didn't know the show had ended? Sitting in that hospital chair, listening to the steady beep of Charles's heart monitor, I realized I'd been living with a stranger, the man I'd built my life around, whose dirty socks I'd picked up for 32 years, whose favorite meals I could cook with my eyes closed. This man had another life, another woman who shared my last name. The first real warning had come 6 months ago, on a Thursday night in February. I remember because I just finished setting the table for dinner, pot roast with those little red potatoes Charles loved, when his phone rang. He was in his study, and I heard him answer with his usual professional tone. But then his voice dropped, became softer, intimate in a way that made me pause at the doorway. "Not tonight, Sophia, I told you. Thursdays are difficult." I'd frozen, dish towel in hand, through the crack in the door. I could see him pacing, running his hand through his silver hair the way he did when anxious. I know, this weekend, I promise. The conference in Columbus, remember?" When he emerged 10 minutes later, I was back in the kitchen, busying myself with unnecessary tasks. "Who was that?" I asked, keeping my voice light. "New client, very demanding." He didn't meet my eyes. "Actually, Maggie, about this weekend, I need to go to Columbus for a conference, urban planning symposium." "Since when do you attend conferences?" I'd been married to an architect for over 3 decades. Charles hated conferences, called them expensive networking nonsense. "The firm wants me to scout some new talent. You know how it is." I didn't. Actually, but I nodded. Played the understanding wife. What else could I do? Accuse him based on a feeling? Demand to see his phone like some jealous teenager? That night, I lay awake listening to his breathing, wondering if he was really asleep or just pretending, like I was. The space between us in our king-sized bed felt like an ocean. When had we stopped reaching for each other in the dark? The Christmas party incident should have been my breaking point. Watching Charles with her, this Sophia, seeing the easy familiarity between them, the way she knew exactly how he took his drink, the inside jokes I wasn't part of, but I'd swallowed it down with the too sweet punch and my pride. The next morning, I'd tried. "That Sophia seems nice. You should invite her and her husband for dinner sometime." Charles had been reading the paper, and his hands stilled for just a moment. "She's not married." "Oh, well, her boyfriend then." "I don't think she's seeing anyone." He'd turned the page, ending the conversation. Later, I'd gone through our credit card statements. Nothing suspicious. Really, some charges at restaurants I didn't recognize, but those could have been client dinners. A hotel charge in Columbus that matched his conference story. I'd felt guilty for snooping. Told myself I was being paranoid. But the doubt had taken root. I found myself studying Charles when he wasn't looking. Noticed how he'd angle his phone away when texting. How he'd started doing his own laundry. "No need for you to bother, Maggie." When for 30 years he'd barely known how to operate the washing machine. 3 weeks ago, there'd been another incident. I'd been at the grocery store and realized I'd forgotten my list. I'd called Charles's cell, but it went straight to voicemail, so I'd tried his office. "Thompson and Associates? How may I direct your call?" "Hi, Janet, it's Margaret Lewis. Is Charles available?" A pause. "Oh, Mrs. Lewis, I'm sorry, but Mr. Lewis left about an hour ago. He said he had a site visit." It was 2 in the afternoon. When Charles came home at 6:30, he mentioned nothing about a site visit. "How was your day?" I'd asked. "Busy. Back-to-back meetings. Barely had time to breathe." The lie had slid out so easily, like butter on warm bread. I'd watched him eat the dinner I'd prepared, chatting about trivial things, the neighbor's new fence, the weather forecast, and wondered how many other lies I'd swallowed without knowing. Now I understood that strange phone call last week, the one where he'd grabbed the phone on the first ring, then told me it was a wrong number, the way he'd been especially attentive afterward, bringing me flowers on a random Tuesday, guilt gifts. I realize now. You're being paranoid, I'd told myself so many times. This is what old age does. It makes you suspicious, insecure. My mother had warned me about this, about how women become invisible after a certain age. Keep yourself up, Margaret, she'd said. Don't give him reasons to look elsewhere. But I had kept myself up. I still colored my hair, still maintained my figure reasonably well for a woman nearing 70. I cooked his favorite meals, kept our home immaculate, supported his career without complaint. What more was I supposed to do? The truth was staring at me now in the stark hospital lighting. Those site visits and client dinners and conferences, they all had a name. Sophia Lewis. Not her maiden name, not her professional name. My name, our name. The audacity of it took my breath away. I thought about all the nights I'd fallen asleep wondering if I was imagining things. All the times I'd pushed down that nagging voice that said something was wrong. All the excuses I'd made for him, for us, for the growing distance between us. Trust your instincts. Emily had told me once when she'd noticed I seemed troubled, but I'd waved her off, too proud to admit that her father and I were anything less than the perfect couple we'd always appeared to be. The morning after Charles's heart attack, I drove home in a daze. He was stable, the doctors assured me, and would need to stay for observation. I'd left him sleeping, telling the nurses I needed to get some things from home. What I really needed was answers. Our house sat on a quiet tree-lined street, looking exactly as I'd left it, except now it felt like a crime scene. I walked through the rooms with new eyes, seeing evidence everywhere. The study where he'd taken those private calls, the jacket closet where he'd hidden receipts, our bedroom, where we'd become strangers. I started in his home office. Charles was meticulous about his work files, but careless about personal items, assuming I'd never look. His desk drawers held the usual: pens, paper clips, business cards, but in the bottom drawer, beneath old tax returns, I found a credit card statement I'd never seen before, a card in his name only, bills sent to his office. My hands trembled as I read the charges. Dinner at Giovanni's, our special anniversary restaurant, on a night he'd claimed to be in Toledo, a jewelry store charge for $800 last month. My birthday had passed with only a card and grocery store flowers, multiple charges at the Hilton downtown, always on Tuesday afternoons. Tuesday afternoons, my book club days. I sank into his leather chair, the one I'd bought him for his 60th birthday. How long had this been going on? How many Tuesday afternoons? How many lies? In the closet, I found more. Pushed behind his winter coats was a garment bag containing a suit I'd never seen. Italian. Expensive. The kind he'd always called flashy nonsense. There was a cologne I didn't recognize, a silk tie still in its Nordstrom box. But it was the manila folder in his briefcase that destroyed me. Insurance documents? Charles had always handled our insurance. Life, health, home. Don't worry about this boring stuff, Maggie, he'd say. Now I understood why. The life insurance policy had been updated 3 months ago, where my name had been as sole beneficiary for 3 decades. It now read, primary beneficiary, Sophia Lewis, spouse. Spouse. The room spun. I gripped the edge of the desk, forcing myself to breathe. There were more documents, a joint checking account at Chase Bank, opened 6 months ago. Charles Lewis and Sophia Lewis. The statements showed regular deposits, withdrawals for restaurants, hotels, even furniture stores. Furniture stores? Were they setting up a home together? I found the answer in the next document, a lease agreement for a 2-bedroom apartment in the trendy Ohio City neighborhood, signed by Charles Lewis and Sophia Lewis, dated 4 months ago. The monthly rent was more than our mortgage. My legs gave out, I slid to the floor, papers scattering around me. 4 months. They'd been living as husband and wife for 4 months while I'd been folding his laundry and making his dental appointments. There were photographs, too, tucked into the back of the folder. Charles and Sophia at what looked like a beach resort, her hand on his chest, displaying a wedding ring I'd never seen. Another showed them at a restaurant, raising champagne glasses. Charles looked happy, younger somehow, the way he used to look at me decades ago. The final blow came in an envelope marked Florida trip. Inside were receipts from last February, the Columbus conference that never was. They'd stayed at the same resort where Charles and I had honeymooned in 1973, the same hotel where we danced barefoot on the beach, where he'd promised to love me forever. I don't know how long I sat there on his office floor, surrounded by the debris of my marriage. The afternoon sun slanted through the blinds, casting prison bar shadows across the evidence. My phone buzzed. The hospital checking if I was coming back. I ignored it. Piece by piece, I photographed everything with my phone. Credit card statements, insurance documents, the lease, the photos. My hands had stopped shaking. A cold clarity had settled over me. Charles had been systematically erasing me from his life. Not just having an affair, that would have been survivable. Possibly. But this was complete replacement. He'd given her my name, my role, my future financial security. While I'd been playing the devoted wife, he'd been building an entirely new life. I thought about the wedding ring on Sophia's finger in those photos. Had there been a ceremony? Some sham wedding somewhere? Or was it just another lie, a prop in their elaborate charade? Everything made sense now. The emotional distance, the lack of intimacy, the constant work obligations. He hadn't been pulling away from our marriage. He'd already left it. I was just the inconvenient detail he hadn't figured out how to handle yet. But the heart attack had forced his hand. The hospital had called both his wives. I gathered all the documents, replaced everything exactly as I'd found it. Charles would never know I'd been here, discovered his secret life. Not yet. As I locked his office door, I felt something shift inside me. The devastation was still there, raw and bleeding, but underneath it, something else was stirring. Rage. Pure, crystalline rage. 32 years. I'd given him 32 years of my life, and this was how he repaid me? By stealing my name, my security, my future, by making me the fool who cooked his dinners while he played house with another woman? No. Charles might have thought he could erase me, replace me like old wallpaper. But he'd forgotten one thing. I knew him better than anyone. I knew his weaknesses, his vanities, his fears. I knew exactly where to apply pressure to make his carefully constructed new life come crashing down. The grieving widow routine could wait. Margaret Lewis had just declared war. I drove straight to Emily's law office in downtown Cleveland. My daughter had inherited her father's sharp mind, but thankfully not his moral flexibility. She was a junior partner at Morrison & Associates, specializing in family law, a career choice that now seemed prophetic. "Mom?" Emily looked up from her desk, surprise flickering across her face. "What are you doing here? How's Dad?" "He's stable." I closed her office door and sat down. "Emily, I need your help, and I need you to promise me you'll listen to everything before you react." Her expression shifted from concern to alarm. "Mom, you're scaring me." I pulled out my phone and showed her the photos I'd taken, one by one. I watched my daughter's face transform, confusion, disbelief, then fury. When I got to the insurance documents listing Sophia as spouse, she actually gasped. "That bastard," she whispered, then caught herself. "I'm sorry, Mom, Don't apologize. He's a bastard." The word felt foreign on my tongue, but oddly satisfying. I need to know my options. Emily switched into lawyer mode, taking notes as I laid out everything, the secret credit cards, the apartment, the insurance changes. She asked careful questions, her legal training evident. "First things first," she said, fingers flying over her keyboard. "Ohio is an equitable distribution state. That means marital assets are divided fairly. Not necessarily equally, but fair in this case." She looked up. Dad's been dissipating marital assets on his affair, that apartment, those dinners, that insurance change. It's all financial infidelity. What about the insurance listing her as spouse? Is that legal? It's fraud. Emily's eyes glinted. He can't legally claim someone as a spouse when he's already married. We need to document everything before he has a chance to cover his tracks. We spent the next 3 hours building a case. Emily made calls to colleagues, researched precedents, created a timeline. I learned terms I'd never wanted to know. Marital waste, hidden assets, financial abandonment. We need to move fast but carefully, Emily said. First, you need your own bank account, today. Transfer enough to cover expenses, but not enough to raise suspicion. I have the household account. No, Mom, your own account at a different bank. You need financial independence before he realizes, It felt strange, walking into KeyBank and opening an account in only my name. Margaret Lewis, individual, not Mrs. Charles Lewis. The teller cheerfully explained about online banking, debit cards, features I'd never needed to understand. Charles had always handled the money. Next came the locksmith. Emily insisted I change the locks on the house immediately. Possession is 9/10 of the law, she said. If he's been living a double life, he might try to move out while you're at the hospital. The locksmith, a young man with kind eyes, didn't ask questions when I requested a rush job. Maybe he saw something in my face. Maybe desperate wives changing locks was more common than I'd thought. I also hired a private investigator, Emily's recommendation. We need to know how deep this goes, she'd said. Property records, business filings, anything in both their names. David Russo was a former cop who specialized in matrimonial investigations. He took notes without judgment as I explained the situation. I'll have preliminary findings within 48 hours, he promised. Full report within a week. Back at Emily's office, we strategized. She'd already drafted a separation agreement and begun documenting marital assets. Our house, Charles's retirement accounts, his partnership in the firm, investment portfolios, things I'd never paid attention to, assuming they were ours. Mom, did you know Dad's partnership is worth almost $2 million? I stared at her. $2 million? Plus the retirement accounts, the investments. Mom, you're looking at an estate worth nearly $4 million. Half of that is yours by law. $4 million. While I'd been clipping coupons and shopping sales, Charles had been building wealth I knew nothing about. Wealth he'd apparently decided to share with Sophia instead. There's something else, Emily said carefully. They've actually gone through some sort of marriage ceremony, even if it's not legal. We might be looking at bigamy charges. Criminal charges. The thought was dizzying. My husband, the respected architect, the church deacon, might be a criminal. That evening, I returned to the hospital wearing my mask of wifely concern. Charles was awake, looking better. The color had returned to his face. Maggie, thank God, he said, reaching for my hand. I was worried. Where were you? Getting things from home? Your pajamas? Your reading glasses? I'd actually brought them, maintaining my cover. How are you feeling? Better. The doctor says I can go home in a few days. He squeezed my hand. I'm sorry I scared you. When you think you're dying, it really puts things in perspective. What's important? Who's important? The hypocrisy was breathtaking. I smiled, patted his hand. Rest now. We'll talk when you're stronger. As I sat in that chair, watching him drift off to sleep, I thought about the apartment in Ohio City. Was Sophia there now? Worried about her husband. Was she pacing their living room, the one furnished with our marital assets, wondering when he'd come home? My phone buzzed. A text from David Russo. Found some interesting property records. Can we meet tomorrow? I glanced at Charles, sleeping peacefully, unaware that his double life was unraveling. He'd thought he was so clever, building his escape route while I played the oblivious wife. But he'd underestimated me. After 32 years, he'd forgotten that still waters run deep. And I was about to show him just how deep. David Russo's report was thorough and damning. Over coffee at a discreet cafe, he laid out his findings. Sophia Lewis was 52, a project manager at Charles's firm who'd been hired 3 years ago. She'd been married once before, divorced, no children. But here's where it got interesting. She had a history of targeting wealthy married men. "This is her third time," David said, sliding photos across the table. "Same pattern. She takes their last name, sets up house, has them change beneficiaries. The previous 2 ended when the wives found out." "What happened to those men?" "Divorced and significantly poorer. She walked away with hefty settlements both times." So Charles wasn't special, and he was just the latest mark. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. "There's more," David continued. "Your husband's been sloppy. He's been using company resources for personal expenses related to Miss Lewis, hotel rooms charged to the company card, dinners written off as client entertainment. His partners might be very interested in this information." A plan began forming in my mind. Charles valued 2 things above all else: his reputation and his career. Both were about to become casualties. That afternoon, I composed an anonymous email from a new account Emily had helped me set up. The recipients included Charles's senior partners at Thompson & Associates and several of their major clients. The subject line read, "Concerns about ethical violations at your firm." The email was professional, matter of fact. It detailed how Charles Lewis had been misusing company funds for personal expenses, engaging in an inappropriate relationship with a subordinate, and potentially exposing the firm to liability. I attached select receipts and credit card statements, enough to prove the allegations but not enough to reveal my source. Within hours, the senior partner, Richard Thompson, called Charles's hospital room. I was sitting right there when Charles answered, watching his face drain of color. "Richard, I can explain." Charles struggled to sit up, wincing. "That's not Richard, please, let me—" The conversation was brief. When Charles hung up, his hands were shaking. "What's wrong, dear?" I asked, the picture of wifely concern. "Nothing, just a work issue." But I could see the panic in his eyes. Over the next 2 days, while Charles recovered, his professional world crumbled, Emily kept me informed through her network. The partners had launched an internal investigation. Clients were asking questions. The Riverfront project, Charles's baby, his legacy, was being reassigned to another architect. I maintained my bedside vigil, bringing him his favorite magazines, adjusting his pillows, all while his phone buzzed incessantly with calls he couldn't answer in front of me. I watched him squirm, torn between maintaining his facade and dealing with his collapsing career. "Maybe you should rest," I'd suggest sweetly whenever he reached for his phone. The doctor said no stress. The second phase of my plan involved our social circle. Charles was proud of his standing in the community, country club membership, church board position, charitable committees. Time to leverage the power of suburban gossip. I called my friend Barbara, the biggest gossip in our church. "I'm so worried about Charles," I confided. "The stress of his affair has caused his heart attack." "Yes, an affair, with someone from his office. I'm devastated, but trying to be strong." Within 24 hours, the news had spread through our social network like wildfire. The sympathy calls poured in. For me, Charles's golf buddies suddenly had scheduling conflicts. The church board president left a message saying Charles should take all the time he needed to focus on his health. But the masterstroke came from the private investigator's discovery about Sophia's past. I had Emily draft a letter to Sophia's previous victims, the ex-wives of her former targets, professional women who'd been blindsided, just like me, women who might want to warn others. One of them, a surgeon's ex-wife named Patricia, called me within hours. "I've been waiting 3 years for Karma to catch up with that woman." She said, "What do you need?" Patricia had evidence of Sophia's pattern, documents, emails, even photos of Sophia wearing Patricia's jewelry. She'd kept everything, hoping for justice someday. "I'll testify if needed," Patricia offered. "That woman destroyed my family. She's a predator." Armed with this information, I made my next move. I called Sophia's direct line at Thompson & Associates. "Sophia Lewis speaking." "Hello, Sophia. This is Margaret Lewis, Charles's actual wife." Silence. Then carefully, "Mrs. Lewis, how is Charles?" "He's recovering, but I thought you should know. Your employment at Thompson and Associates is under review. It seems they've discovered some interesting patterns in your past employment history." "I don't know what you mean." "Don't you? Well, perhaps Patricia Morrison could refresh your memory, or Jennifer Chen. I believe you knew their husbands quite well." More silence. I could practically hear her calculating, reassessing. "What do you want?" "I want you gone. Resign from Thompson and Associates today. Leave Ohio. And if you ever contact my husband again, I'll make sure your pattern of targeting married men becomes public knowledge. I have a daughter who's a lawyer, and she's very protective of her mother." "You can't threaten me." "I'm not threatening. I'm informing your resignation today or by tomorrow. Every major architecture firm from here to California will know about your specialized skills in project management." I hung up. My hands were steady. My conscience was clear. That evening, Charles received a text. I watched him read it, his face cycling through confusion, alarm, and despair. He deleted it quickly, but not before I saw his hands tremble. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Fine," he whispered. "Just fine." But I knew what that text said. Sophia was gone. His professional reputation was in tatters, his social standing destroyed, and he was lying in a hospital bed, dependent on the wife he'd tried to erase. The revenge tasted sweeter than I'd imagined. 3 weeks after his heart attack, Charles was home, moving carefully through our house like a ghost. His partnership at Thompson and Associates had been dissolved by mutual agreement. His reputation in Cleveland's architectural community was ruined. Sophia had vanished, leaving behind a resignation letter and an apartment full of furniture he'd have to deal with somehow. But I wasn't done. I chose Giovanni's for our confrontation, the Italian restaurant where Charles had proposed 33 years ago, the same place he'd taken Sophia just 2 months earlier. According to the credit card records, the irony wasn't lost on me. "We need to talk." I'd told him that morning. "Somewhere private. How about dinner at Giovanni's? 7:30? He'd looked surprised, then hopeful. Perhaps he thought I was extending an olive branch, offering reconciliation. He spent the afternoon trimming his beard, selecting a tie with shaking hands. The powerful architect was gone. In his place stood an old man desperate to salvage something from the wreckage. I arrived first, requesting our old table by the window overlooking the city lights. The maitre d' remembered us, offered condolences on Charles's health scare. I smiled, played the devoted wife one last time. I dressed carefully, the black dress I'd worn to my mother's funeral, pearl earrings Charles had given me for our 20th anniversary. In my purse sat a manila folder that would end everything. Charles arrived at 7:35, moving slowly, favorably. The heart attack had aged him. He looked smaller, grayer, diminished. For a moment, I felt a flicker of the old sympathy. Then I remembered the photos of him and Sophia in Florida, at our honeymoon resort. "Maggie," he said, attempting a smile, "you look wonderful." "Sit down, Charles." The waiter brought wine, a Chianti we'd shared on our anniversary for years. Charles reached for his glass with trembling fingers. "I know you must have questions," he began, "about things. I want you to know—" "Stop." I opened the folder, spreading its contents across the white tablecloth like tarot cards revealing his future. Divorce papers, already filed. Emily helped me prepare them. His face went white. "Maggie, please." "The apartment lease in Ohio City." I laid it down. "The joint checking account with Sophia." Another document. "The insurance forms listing her as your spouse." Slap. "The credit cards you hid from me." Slap. "Photos of you two in Florida at our honeymoon hotel." Each piece of evidence landed like a physical blow. Charles shrunk back in his chair. 32 years, Charles. I gave you 32 years of my life, raised your daughter, kept your home, supported your career, and this is how you repay me? It wasn't supposed to— He stopped, swallowed. Sophia made me feel young again, vital. You and I, we'd become roommates, not spouses. So you decided to commit bigamy, insurance fraud, to systematically erase me from our life? I never meant for it to go so far. Which part? The secret apartment? Calling her your wife? Or changing your life insurance to cut me out entirely? He had no answer. Around us, other diners enjoyed their meals, oblivious to the marriage dying at table 12. Here's what's going to happen, I continued, my voice steady as steel. You're going to sign these divorce papers. Tonight, you're going to agree to the settlement Emily's outlined, 60% of all assets, including your partnership buyout. You're going to refinance the house into my name only, and you're going to pay alimony for the rest of my life. 60%? That's fair, considering you spent marital assets on your mistress. Emily says I could get more if we go to trial. Want to test that theory? I'm sure the judge would love to hear about the fake marriage, the insurance fraud, the embezzlement from your firm. Charles's hand shook as he reached for the wine. I'll have nothing left. You'll have your freedom. Isn't that what you wanted? To start fresh with someone new? I leaned forward, though I heard Sophia left town rather suddenly. Problems at work, I believe. His eyes widened as understanding dawned. That was you. The email to the partners. Sophia's resignation. I protected myself. Something you should have done instead of thinking with your... I caught myself. Even now, I was too much of a lady to finish that sentence. I could fight this, he said weakly. Get my own lawyer. You could, but then I'd have to share Patricia Morrison's evidence about Sophia's pattern of targeting married men, and Jennifer Tan's documentation of the exact same behavior. Did you know you were her third victim, Charles? Did she tell you that when she was playing house in that apartment? The last of his resistance crumbled. I watched the man I'd loved for more than 3 decades realize he'd been played by a professional con artist and then destroyed by the wife he'd underestimated. Sign the papers, Charles, sign them, and we can both move on. He signed, his signature, once bold and confident on architectural plans worth millions, now wavered like a child's. I gathered the documents, returned them to the folder. Then I stood, leaving him sitting alone at our anniversary table. Maggie, he called after me. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. I turned back. No, Charles, you're sorry you got caught. There's a difference. I walked out of Giovanni's with my head high, breathing in the cool Ohio night. Tomorrow, Emily would file the papers. Within 6 months, I'd be divorced, financially secure and free. Behind me, through the restaurant window, I could see Charles still sitting at our table, staring at the wine bottle. The maitre d' would eventually ask him to leave. He'd go back to our house, my house now, to pack his things. Maybe he'd try calling Sophia, only to find her number disconnected. But that wasn't my concern anymore. Margaret Lewis was done being anyone's fool. 2 months after that dinner at Giovanni's, Charles was back in Cleveland General Hospital, another heart attack, more severe this time. The call came at 8:15 on a Sunday morning as I was tending my garden, finally planting the roses I'd always wanted, but Charles had deemed too much work. Mrs. Lewis, your husband has been admitted again. He's stable but critical. Also, the nurse paused. His other emergency contact is already here. Sophia, so she hadn't gone far after all. I took my time getting ready, applied lipstick carefully, chose a cheerful yellow blouse that made me look years younger. The divorce had been finalized 3 weeks ago, but the hospital still had me listed as next of kin. Charles, in his typical carelessness, hadn't updated his medical forms. The cardiac unit was quiet when I arrived. Through the glass door of Charles's room, I could see her, Sophia, sitting bedside, holding his hand. She looked haggard, older than her 52 years. The glossy confidence from the Christmas party had vanished. I entered without knocking. Both of them turned, Charles with alarm, Sophia with something like defiance. "Margaret," Charles wheezed, "you didn't have to." "The hospital called." I set my purse on the visitor's chair, claiming my space. "As your ex-wife, I'm still listed as your primary medical contact, legally. I have decision-making authority if you become incapacitated. Sophia stood abruptly. You can't. I can. Actually, my daughter's a lawyer, remember? I smiled pleasantly. But don't worry. I'm not here to interfere, just to clarify a few things. I pulled out a folder. I'd become quite fond of dramatic folder reveals. Charles, since you never got around to updating your medical directives, I took the liberty of filing the correct paperwork. As of tomorrow morning, Miss Peterson, her actual legal name, will be your official medical proxy. Congratulations. Relief flickered across Charles's face, quickly replaced by confusion as I continued. Of course, there are some financial implications. Your insurance from Thompson & Associates ended with your partnership. I hope you've secured new coverage. Medical bills can be quite overwhelming. This unit runs about $10,000 a day, I believe. Charles's monitors began beeping faster. Sophia clutched his hand tighter. And Sophia, dear, I turned to her. I do hope you're prepared for the realities of Charles's situation. His assets are considerably reduced after our divorce settlement. The house is gone, of course. His retirement accounts are mostly mine now, but I'm sure your love will sustain you both through the challenges ahead. You bitter old, Sophia started. Careful, I interrupted. Stress is bad for Charles's heart. Besides, I'm not bitter. I'm grateful. You did me a favor, taking him off my hands, 71 years old, unemployed, history of heart disease, and a reputation in Cleveland that would make job hunting challenging. But I'm sure you two will be very happy in that expensive apartment. Charles tried to speak but only managed a wheeze. The monitors beeped more insistently. Oh, one more thing. I pulled out a final document. Patricia Morrison asked me to give you this. Sophia, she's filing a civil suit for emotional distress and financial fraud related to your relationship with her late husband. Apparently, she's found 2 other women willing to testify about your pattern of behavior. But I'm sure Charles will stand by you through that legal battle. Won't you, Charles? A nurse rushed in, drawn by the alarms. I need everyone to step outside. Now. In the hallway, Sophia turned on me, her carefully constructed mask finally cracking. You've ruined everything. No, dear. You two ruined everything. I just refused to be a victim. I adjusted my purse strap. Charles is all yours now. Every medical crisis, every bill, every sleepless night. You wanted my life? You got it. The 71-year-old husband with a bad heart and no money. Enjoy. I walked toward the elevator, my heels clicking confidently on the linoleum behind me. I heard Sophia's sharp intake of breath, probably calculating the cost of Charles's care against his newly diminished assets. As the elevator doors opened, I caught my reflection in the polished steel. The woman looking back wasn't the dutiful wife who'd discovered her husband's betrayal 2 months ago. This was Margaret Lewis, survivor. Margaret Lewis, victor. The afternoon sun was glorious as I stepped outside. My phone buzzed. Emily, checking in. How did it go? Perfectly, I told her. Your father and Sophia have exactly what they deserve. Each other. I drove home, my home, with the windows down, spring air rushing through my hair. In the driveway sat my new car, a sporty red convertible I'd bought with part of the settlement. Charles had always insisted such cars were impractical, but Charles's opinions no longer mattered. Inside, the house felt different, lighter. I'd redecorated, removing all traces of our life together. The walls were now a warm cream instead of the beige Charles preferred. The heavy leather furniture had been donated, replaced with comfortable pieces in blues and greens. My books, banished to one small shelf for 32 years, now filled an entire wall. I poured myself a glass of wine, the good stuff, not the economical brand Charles always bought, and stepped onto the back deck. My garden bloomed with new life. The roses I'd planted were beginning to bud, promising beauty in the weeks to come. My phone rang. Barbara, probably hungry for gossip about the hospital encounter. I let it go to voicemail. The Margaret who lived for others' approval, who needed to explain herself, who worried what people thought. She was gone. At 68, I was starting over, but this time, I was writing my own story, and it didn't include Charles Lewis or the shadow of who I'd been as his wife. Revenge, I'd discovered, wasn't just about destroying those who'd wronged you. It was about reclaiming yourself. And as I stood in my garden, wine in hand, sunset painting the sky, I knew one thing for certain. The best revenge was living well, and I intended to live very, very well indeed. Thank you for listening to my story. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and let me know your thoughts on Margaret's journey. What would you have done in her shoes?